income. Okay. So we'll go to chapter 30, redistribution of income. So when we talk about redistribution of income, basically we're talking about the amount of money people do make as individuals. But if it comes to redistributing it, it would have meant that income is not equal. That means there's inequality in income. That is why there's redistribution. That's why government would want to try to redistribute income, to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. So let's go down, please.
Income inequality.
Okay, yes. The income inequality in the market economy, individuals receive different levels of income. So the existence of having different levels of income within a group is called income inequality. Do you get the point there?
Yeah.
All right. So the difference, okay, for example, let's say the US is, okay, let me just go down, please. Let's see. The difference here between the company director, who is a high income earner, and the shop assistant, who is a low income earner, is considerable. Yeah, they're talking about the difference between the income of a shop assistant, which is 17,600, and a teacher, which is 48,000 per annum.
Is that in a year?
In a year, per annum is a year. So there's income inequality there, right? So let's just go down. The second paragraph said the US is an example of a country where income inequality is severe. The information, so we don't need all these ones. At least you understand the first point about income inequality. That means the existence of differences in the income of different individuals. That is income inequality. So they said okay. So what are the reasons why we have different income inequalities? The first one, they said workers with natural talents, a good education, valuable work experience, or who can offer labor in the market where there is a shortage of qualified labor will tend to earn more. So one of the reasons why this plays Lasaya. Okay. So one of the reasons why people could earn high income is based on the kind of talent they have and their availability in the market where they are not available. So more or less, your talent, your skills are not, your skills are unique. So if your skills are unique, then you might be earning more. That's the first point. The second point, people who do not work, such as pensioners, receive low income than those in employment. So another reason why we have difference in income is that you're not working. In as much as you're not working, then you won't have the income as those that are working. So there's difference in income based on the fact that some are employed, some are unemployed. Do you get the second point there? Do you get the second point? Yes. The third point, the extent to which a government distributes income through taxes and welfare payments is influential. So government might try to redistribute income. How the government do that? By increasing taxes. So government might charge high income earners more taxes than low income earners.
Yeah.
Do you understand? So the taxes retrieved from high income earners might be distributed to,
what's the word after income?
Income earners, those that are who receive money. Okay, so if government is increasing the tax, it might mean that those taxes can be used to pay some social benefits, for example, pension or unemployment benefits.
So they might distribute it to the people who are unemployed.
For social benefits, which could be unemployment or pension. Do you get the point? The last point, people who own assets such as property, shares, and capital will enjoy additional income such as rents, dividends, interest, respectively. So another reason why people have different income is that they own assets like property. So I might be a teacher, you are a teacher too. We get the same salary, fine. But I have property that you don't have. Yes. So I receive rent income, but you don't receive rent income. That makes me to have more income than you. So people might have income than others based on the kind of asset they possess.
Passive income.
Yeah, passive income, yes. Based on the asset they possess. Is it clear?
Yes.
Any question about that? Absolute poverty. So when we talk about absolute poverty, what does that imply? It means the inability of individuals to be able to afford the basic. That is absolute. So here it said the unequal distribution of income in countries often means that a proportion of the population lives in poverty. This means that people are living in an environment where their needs are not fully met. However, there are two definitions of poverty. We have the absolute poverty and we have the relative poverty. But let's talk about the absolute poverty. This is where people try to survive in an environment, even their basic needs are not adequately met, like I just said earlier. It is absolute poverty because that individual or those in that group cannot afford the basic needs: food, clothing, shelter. They struggle to eat, they struggle to shelter, they struggle to clothe. That is absolute poverty. Do you understand what absolute poverty is?
Yeah.
Let's go down. Then we have relative poverty. Are you there?
Yeah.
For relative poverty, here it says a second division of poverty is relative poverty. This is always present in society. Relatively poor people are to be found at the bottom end of the nation's income scales. Their incomes will fall short of the levels needed to provide an average living standard in their country where they live. There's no precise measurement of relative poverty. However, one approach is to measure the number of households whose total income is at a certain level below the median income for that country. So we try to find the figure for the average income in that country. So if the income you earn is below the average income, then you are in relative poverty.
Yeah.
Do you get it?
Yeah.
Well, as soon as you get, are you with me, please? As soon as you get the figure for the average income in that country, those below it are living in relative poverty. So basically, we could say relative poverty is just the difference between what you can afford and what I can afford. Do you understand relative poverty here? Do you have any question about that?
No.
So they said, to the last paragraph there, they said, relative poverty will also change over time. This is because income levels change over time. They usually rise. Therefore, if an individual receives an increase in income that is higher than the average increase, that individual might move out of poverty altogether or further away from the poverty line. So if you are in the level of relative poverty and your income level increases, that means you are moving out of the line. You are moving out of that line. So that means relative poverty is easier to reduce. Relative poverty is easier to eradicate than absolute poverty. Do you get it?
Yeah.
So we have an activity there. So we go down to reasons to reduce poverty and inequality. Why is it important for poverty to be elevated? You cannot, how do I say, you cannot eradicate poverty. You cannot stop poverty. It will still exist. The only thing you can do is to elevate it, like to reduce it.
Reduce it.
Yeah, you cannot stop it. So they said, first, reasons why we have to reduce poverty and inequality is one, meet basic needs. They said just under 10% of the world's population still live in absolute poverty, according to the World Bank. This means that around 700 million people struggle to survive. In some countries, many people are undernourished. For example, in Zambia and Central African Republic, 47.8% and 47.7% of the population, respectively, do not have enough to eat. So we're saying
that's almost half the population.
Yeah, in Central African Republic and Zambia, there's absolute poverty there. I think that point is clear. So in some cases, people in absolute poverty are starving to death. Young children are particularly at risk. According to one study, 3.1 million children died of starvation, lack of food to eat. In 2011, this was 45% of the total number of child deaths in that year. Also undernutrition. So, based on what they said, for Central African Republic and Zambia, they are living in absolute poverty. That's the point. They said in some cases, people in absolute poverty are starving to death. That means they couldn't find food, and that causes their death. All right. So, okay, let's see what they say. Then there's undernutrition. When it's undernutrition, that means they cannot eat nutritious food. They cannot even find a balanced diet. That is what undernutrition is. Poverty would cause that. Because if you can't eat, how can you even talk about balancing the diet?
Yeah.
Do you understand? So if absolute poverty, the last paragraph there, please. If absolute poverty can be completely eliminated, the basic needs of people will be met. This would avoid the loss of life from starvation and help children to grow up healthy. So the first point is about meeting the basic needs. So if absolute poverty can be eliminated, it would have meant that the basic needs of people are met. So if basic needs are met, that means people won't be dying of starvation and malnutrition. So the first reason, that's the first reason, being able to meet the basic needs. So one of the reasons why we have to we have to redistribute income and to reduce poverty is to be able to meet up with the basic needs. And if you are able to meet up with the basic needs, it allows us to, it reduces starvation to death and malnutrition. Is it clear? That's the first point. The second point, raise living standards. So, are you there, please?
Yes.
If poverty can be reduced, living standards across the world would rise. If absolute poverty is eliminated, the basic needs of people would be met, and clearly their living standards will improve. So the point about living standard is what you are able to buy, your ability to live comfortably, your ability to want to buy, and being able to see to buy. So your purchasing power will decide your living standard.
Or
so,
your income.
Yeah, your purchasing power is your income. So if poverty is reduced, it means people would have been able to buy goods, services, the basic one. So that means they are living, their way of life would improve, unlike how it was when they cannot even afford the basic. So if to improve the living standard, we need to reduce poverty. To improve the living standard, we need to redistribute income. That is the second point. Do you get it or not?
Yeah.
Raise living standard is the same as improving living standard.
For example, raising the minimum wage.
Yes, minimum wages, taxes by government, subsidy by government too. The third one, ethical reasons. It said many people think that poverty and income inequality should be reduced for ethical reasons. This means that they believe that it is moral duty of both people and government to help reduce poverty. So they say it is ethical. And what is ethics? Ethics are the moral way of doing things. So we shouldn't be talking about poverty. That is the point. So poverty should be something that bothers everybody.
Yeah.
That is what they are saying here. Poverty should be something that bothers me, that bothers you, that we have to find a way of eliminating. So it is ethical to reduce poverty. That is the third point. Do we get the point? The first reason why we have to reduce poverty and distribute income is to be able to meet the basic needs. The second one is about the living standard. It will help to improve the living standard. The third point now is ethical reasoning, that it should be a border to everyone. It should be a responsibility.
It should be border that you can't be facing.
Poverty, yeah. Is it clear? The next one. So that's about the reasons why we have to reduce poverty and redistribute income.
Now we're going to talk about
government intervention. As soon as a country understands that it's living in a poverty situation, government must intervene. Government must take charge. Government must come up with different policies to take them out of that situation. That's what we need to talk about here. Are you with me? So generally, if a country enjoys more economic growth, the level of poverty in that country should fall. So if the economy is growing in your country, it means the poverty in such country should fall. Yeah. Because at that point in time, your GDP would rise, and even the GDP per capita. So if the GDP per capita is increasing, it means the income level in such country is increasing. The poverty level is falling. So however, even if poverty did fall, there's still likely to be considerable income inequality. According to a report by the OECD in 2014, the gap between rich and poor is now at its highest level in 30 years. In most countries, if a government is committed to reducing poverty and achieving a fair distribution of income, a number of measures could be used or chosen, yes. So increasing your GDP does not necessarily mean that poverty will be reduced. Why? Because in such country, some people will still be earning more than others. There's income inequality. So income inequality would lead to poverty. If not absolute, relative poverty.
Even if the income of the economy of the country is growing.
If the GDP, yes, if the GDP of the country is growing, but people are still, there's still differences in income.
Inequality.
There's inequality, there could be relative poverty. So what would government have to do? The first thing is through taxation. So government could use progressive taxation. Are you with me, please?
Yeah.
So when we talk about progressive tax, it said a progressive tax system is one that places the burden of taxation more heavily on the rich. So the rich pays more taxes. That's why we call it progressive. So the more income you have, the more tax you pay. So how progressive, how successful you become is how much tax, that will determine how much tax you pay. So as soon as government is able to do that, government can now take those income or revenue from taxes to try to distribute into the economy. Do you get the point?
Yeah.
So for progressive tax, the tax burden is on those that are wealthy and rich. Clear?
Yeah.
Then in contrast, a regressive tax system places the burden tax on heavily on the poor. We call it regressive. Why is it regressive? It's regressive if the tax burden dwells on the shoulder of the poor. So where you are supposed to be paying more taxes, the poor ones are paying more, or the burden is on the poor ones. Did you get the point or not? We call it regressive, yes.
This will make it worse.
Yeah, they are saying it is not possible. It's a system. We're just talking about the different type of taxes we have.
Oh, okay.
No, you can't use regressive tax. Using regressive tax to stop poverty, no way. It's going to always increase tax. It will increase the gap because the burden of tax is on the poor. The poor don't even have income, so how do they pay more tax? You get the point?
Yeah.
So if the government uses the progressive tax system, the gap between the rich and the poor might be closed. How? The poor will be able to, afford the basic because government would have give them some social benefits.
Yeah.
This is because people on higher incomes will be paying more tax. However, if average incomes are rising rapidly, the people at the top of the income scales will benefit more so that the gap might widen. The gap is also more likely to close if the government gives poorer sectors of society some of the tax it collects from those of higher income. So listen, if government is trying to distribute income by ensuring that the rich ones pay more taxes, it's fine. But the problem is that as soon as the poor ones have income to make, their spending power will increase. Yes or no? But who are they spending to? They are spending for the rich ones. So that also increases the gap again.
So it's a cycle.
It becomes a cycle. You get the point? So the poor ones buys from the rich ones. So if the poor ones have ability to buy now, they have higher purchasing power, it makes the gap continue to increase because they will continue to spend, reducing their level of income, and the rich continue to get more, increasing their level of income. So the gap continues to increase. Do you get the point here?
Yeah.
So the second way of distributing income is through benefit payments. So government gives social benefit, pensions, and the rest. Let's read. They said in most developed countries, government have a welfare system which is used to distribute income in favor of the poor. The government will come up with a system, a policy that would benefit the poor than the rich. So the government will create a system that allows the poor to have accessibility to money. Do you understand? Government will create a system that allows the poor to be able to access money. And with that, income will be distributed. So they said most systems involve using tax revenues to make direct payments to those on low incomes and those who cannot work at all. So government doesn't have any money anywhere. The only source of revenue for government is through tax. So government will take this tax and immediately create a system that will automatically send those remnants to the poor. That is the point of redistribution here. Is it clear, please?
Yes.
The third one, investment in education and healthcare. So one way to reducing poverty is through education. if you want your economy, if you want your country to be out of poverty, educate that economy, educate that country. Because when you educate the economy, when you educate the country, it improves the skills of the workforce. And that gives them opportunity to be able to work. Do you understand? Because
high income.
they have the tendency of receiving high income. Because most of the people don't have job because they don't have necessary skills to get the job. So educate your population. And as soon as you do that, little by little, they will be out of poverty. Because they will become attractive to employers. That is education. And for healthcare, I talked about education. They said, if people are educated and able to develop a range of skills, such as reading, writing, numeracy, communication analysis, problem solving, evaluation, critical thinking, and language, they are more employable. They become attractive to employers. That is the point I made. Education will give them, because most of the poverty we are talking about is linked to unemployment. So, however, according to UNICEF, schooling has other benefits. Education will give the next generation the tools to fight poverty and conquer disease. School also offers children a safe environment with support, supervision, and socialization. Here, they learn life skills that can help them prevent diseases, including how to avoid HIV, AIDS, and malaria. Children may receive life-saving vaccines, fresh water, and nutrient supplementation at school. Unfortunately, investment in education is very expensive, and the returns on the investment often take many years to realize. The point is that education is so expensive.
And it's a long-time investment.
And it's a long-term investment, which the return doesn't come tomorrow. It comes after a long period of time. That's why sometimes people used to say, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. So education is expensive. Generally, education is expensive. And the returns doesn't just come immediately. It takes a bit of time to come. Because you have to finish your education years, you have to do a lot of things before you get a job.
Yeah.
I think you have the third point there, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the end about that. Then you have the multiple choice question. Can you do it, please?
Yes.